Serious? Husband who had another man's kid pop out in the delivery room. What happened? We weren't married, just dating, but she made it seem like there was no one else in the picture. So I started paying most of her expenses and spent most days with her, talking to the womb, playing music for it, reading to it, etc. Everything felt official. Doctor visits together, had the baby shower. I even picked out the child's name. About a week before birth, she calls me crying. No words, just sobbing when I answer the phone. Not sure how, but I just knew right then. I asked if there was someone else and she said maybe. I hung up and drove to her house to reassure her that it was okay, that I wasn't mad, and no matter what happens, everything will work itself out. Of course I was lying. I was freaking furious. I just didn't want to stress out a pregnant woman. Fast forward to the delivery room and the other guy isn't there. Heck, he's not even in town. Everyone there was convinced the child was mine after seeing him. It was a beautiful experience, just too surreal with everything hanging over it, so I was at least cognizant enough not to sign the birth certificate. Afterwards, all parties involved basically agreed to keep our distance until paternity was established. Both of us took separate DNA tests a few weeks after, and I figured our test results would take the same amount of time to come back. Nope. His came back in a week, mine took a month. Her and her family knew I wasn't the father but never told me. They just let me sweat it out on my own for 3 more weeks. I don't think I've ever felt such a conflicting amount of emotions as I did the moment I read those results. And I still think that entire family is trash for keeping the news from me. But I don't have to live with them, so silver linings. I know you specifically said husbands, but dang if that didn't feel cathartic after type. A close friend of mine had a child with a girl and it turned out it wasn't his. A close family member of theirs was the real father. She admitted it shortly after the kid was born. They had a paternity test which confirmed it. They broke up but he still wanted to be a part of the kid's life. She committed suicide shortly after, so he raises the kid alone. My ex-wife and I were going through our divorce. I have a daughter with her and she has a son from a previous relationship. We were living separately and seeing other people, but we had hooked up one night despite this. A couple months pass and she comes back and says she's pregnant and it's mine and wants to get back together. I ask if it could be anyone else's and she says possibly. So we end up giving it a go again and go through the birth, and the kid looks like me and we're happy for a bit, and then everything ends up going to crap again. Turns out no, the baby wasn't mine. She ends up going back to this loser and now has lost rights to all 3 of her kids. I now have sole custody of my daughter. Happened to a friend of mine. He and his wife had a lot of problems. Mostly that she's a raging psycho. They adopted a little boy together. A year or so later, his grandpa, my friend's, passed and he traveled home for the funeral. While he was gone, she cheated and became pregnant by the other guy. He tried for a while to consider working through it, but she made such an act of how they were having a baby and posting pictures of the pregnancy test on Facebook and sounding like their happy little family was just perfect. He couldn't do it. They're currently in the middle of divorce proceedings and he lives in his own place with shared custody of their adopted son. Now that the baby was born a few weeks back, on Father's Day, to add insult to injury, the paternity test is being done, or already was, so he is not responsible for the baby. Man, on Father's Day, that's fricked. This chick was newly assigned to my husband's old ship and engaged to a guy she had met in boot camp. They were assigned separate stations, so she came out by herself. Little by little, you'd hear talk of her screwing around with other guys, but most just chalked it up to nothing until they started getting underway in preparation for deployment. One guy, who had a wife and children of his own, bragged about sleeping with her, and then a few others popped up. Her friends on the ship all knew, but they ignored it. Right before deployment, she married her fiancé. 2 days before the wedding, she slept with the original bragger. All of her friends who knew were in the wedding party. On deployment, original bragger had gotten out, so she started screwing around with some other guy. It got to the point where the chiefs knew, but only tried to prevent it by not allowing her to be alone with him in any of the spaces. It obviously didn't work and she got pregnant soon after. She tried to play it off to her new husband that it was his. She kept that up until they sent her off the ship for being too far along. Her husband came out to see her when she got back and I suppose it all went fine. I'm not sure if she told him then or she continued to lie, but either way, he was still in the picture. Meanwhile, the actual father's time was up on the ship and was restationed out of the country. Then, all of a sudden, right before the baby was born, she changed her name back and all mention of him was scrubbed from her page. I'm not sure what exactly went down. So, then baby is born and a couple months later, she flew to where baby daddy was so he could meet the kid. Soon after that, they got married and now apparently live as a family. I choose to believe someone sent the husband an anonymous letter and he noped out of that situation. Throughout the story I was just internally screaming that no one was telling him what was happening. A guy I knew was married to a real hose beast and they had 3 kids together. He would leave town for work and her friend, Uncle Frank, not his real name, would spend time with them. Guy and hose beast are together for a decade and she decides on a divorce. He agrees. Oldest boy tells Guy that his mother has been telling him that Guy isn't his dad and he shouldn't get too attached. The kid was already almost a teen and only knew Guy as his father. She goes loopy and kills herself, blaming Guy in the note, and kid wants a DNA test to put his mind at ease. Guy agrees and secretly tests all 3 kids. Oldest and youngest are his, middle kid isn't. He gets Uncle Frank legally compelled to take a DNA test for one of the kids but doesn't say which one. It's a match. I convinced Guy to legally adopt the middle kid because he couldn't bear to have someone else raise them and the kid now knows Guy isn't the biological dad. It was a fricked up couple of years for those kids. The real kicker is that the zealot mill knew about the affair and gave the daughter her blessing. Jesus Christ, that last fricking line. My grandfather after he left my grandma had gotten a vasectomy and started to date this woman who had gotten pregnant with his kid. He sat there and led her on saying yes he's so excited, how much he loves her ect. He waited in the room with her and told her right when she was giving birth to a darker skin tone child and he pretended to be mortified, leaving her crying. He told her when she stopped crying he got a vasectomy about 2 years prior and walked out to never see her again. In it for the long game, I guess. What the frick? I'm on mobile and can't even read this thread. Reddit really needs a clear button for deleted crap, or hide or something. Holy crap, that's a lot of removed posts. I had a soldier in Afghanistan whose wife got pregnant. The times just didn't match up with her due date. She told him the doctor said she had a condition that caused babies to be born 3 months early. Poor bastard believed her. Baby came out black. He wasn't, nor was she. Last I heard he was raising them as his own. He wasn't the brightest guy anyway, but I'm sure he had to know. Ignorance is bliss, I guess. Even willful ignorance. Maybe he's a better man than me. Not to get too personal, but it would have hurt more if I hadn't done the math at the beginning and known the kid wasn't mine. My wife and I were sorta separated at the time and things were confusing from a relationship standpoint. So when she came to me with the info, I was 90% sure it wasn't mine. But because of the emotional confusion I didn't want to turn down supporting a potential kid of mine. I guess my biggest mistake was not getting the test done in the first place. But what can I say, when things are confusing sometimes you let things slide until it's too late. A guy I went to high school with fell in love with a girl who gave it away to anyone who showed her interest. After a few months of being together she gets pregnant. The guy didn't think he had a reason to doubt paternity, so he went with it. The baby comes out completely white. He was black. She convinces him the baby is light skinned so he stays and raises the kid as his for a few years. Something finally clicks either guy's head and he goes and gets a paternity test. Wow, finally something I can contribute to. My dad was married with his first wife. She got pregnant and well the baby came out black. My dad said he didn't care and wanted to raise it as his own and well she told him it's not going to work and left him for the baby's father. My dad was in the Air Force at the time. Got stationed to Italy where he met my mom and they got married after 3 months and had 4 kids and raised us in Italy. To this day they are still married for almost 50 years. As for my dad's ex-wife, she was murdered by the black guy who was the baby's father when he found out she cheated on him. My dad found out 40 years later when he went back and visited his town in Ohio for the first time in almost 40 years. He was outside the school with a video camera. Doesn't sound weird at all, right? Narrating that it was where he went to school and was approached by a person that went to school with him and told him. I had the opposite happen and I'm the child. My dad raised me with my mom until I was about 3 or 4 and my older brother was 7. Then took off with us to Arizona without any knowledge to my mom. Lived there for a couple years, but he was never a real father figure to me, but more so to my brother. The reason being that he didn't think that I was his even though my mom stayed faithful through their pretty crappy marriage. He pretty much cussed my mom out of my life until he finally allowed summer visits to her just to get, mostly, me and my brother out of the house for a couple months. Fast forward to around the time I turn 9. And my dad decides to severely punish me and my brother to barefoot yard work for breaking a plate on accident. After the first day, I'm audibly crying in class because every step I take hurts like heck. My teachers asks what's wrong. I explain, and CPS is called immediately. Next thing I know, I'm staying with my grandparents on my dad's side because he's abusive. My mom is flying down here, and the trials begin. The court rules full custody in favor of my mom, who I live with, as well as my stepdad, who is the best father figure I could ever hope for. It's been about 7 years since the trials, and I haven't seen my biological dad since, but would like to know why he skimped out on being a father to me if I ever meet him. Bro, Luca, you got lucky. The universe provides. You would like to know why he skimped out. May never find out, but when it comes time for you to be a pop, I'm assuming you are a dude. You will be very available to your kids. She's 13 now. I'm still in her life, but she lives with her mother. She still calls me daddy even though, from what I've heard, everyone has told her that I'm not a real dad. My uncle raised a child to about 3-4 years of age and then started to notice the resemblance to his best friend. One day he took him for a DNA test instead of childcare and voila. This happened to someone in my direct family, except the truth didn't come out for a few years after. Another child and a marriage happened in between. He's never been the same. This happened to a friend. They had 3 kids, so they didn't really want another, but the wife enjoyed being pregnant, so she agreed to become a surrogate for a gay couple, which ended up being one of his cousins. The gay dads and her husband were in the room when she delivered. There was a moment of indignation when one of the gay dads got too excited and snuck a peep to see if the bub was coming out, but other than that it was okay. They still see the gay dads and the kid quite a bit, which was part of their written agreement, and they named the surrogates and husband godparents to keep the child in their lives. I believe they also got a fair few freebies, a lot of organic food, cooked meals and babysitting at her practice runs, as well. Bit late to the game and may not be fully relevant, but bear with me. Long-term relationship with my childhood sweetheart ended through a rough patch just over 4 years in. We got back together 2 months later. She told me she'd begun taking her contraceptives again and our sexual relationship began again on the back of that. 2 months pass and not only do I discover she'd slept with 2 of my best friends and a stranger during our short separation, but had continued to see one of the best friends whilst reclaiming our relationship. A month later, I lose my job due to the mental trauma of the whole thing, and she tells me she's pregnant. I question her about the contraceptives. She admitted to never using them. I know men will think I'm stupid for the decision I made here, but I'll let it all affect nothing. Despite definitely not being financially stable, mature enough, or in any way ready for a child, especially one that might be the offspring of what used to be my best friend, I fought my hardest for our relationship and took the child in as my own. I still don't know for certain who her biological father is, but there's a good chance it's me, and honestly, I couldn't care less. She is an absolute blessing and there's no way the other potential father would give her the childhood she, or any child, deserves. I won't downplay the emotional torture leading up to the birth, but I also won't understate the sheer love I feel for that little girl. She's my little miracle and DNA won't change anything unless I allow it. Has no one on Reddit ever watched an episode of Jerry Springer or Maury? This stuff happens every day on those shows and you get to see the aftermath, with DNA proof. And, you can learn good fight moves. Not the husband, I'm the child. My mum is the most ridiculously Caucasian person you've ever met. My dad was Maori, dark features, skin, eyes, According to my grandma who was there for my birth, the following things happened. I arrived in all my totally Caucasian glory. My dad storms out never to be seen again and refuses to have his name put on the birth certificate even though my mum promises to waive child support rights, which back then you could apparently do. In exchange, my grandfather, grandma's ex-husband, and his new wife show up and announce that they're not going to have anything to do with this half-black bastard spawn and refuse to even see me, nor do they realize I'm totally lily white at this stage. Fast forward to 6 months later, my grandfather has decided to dote on me in secret. My step-grandmother thought he was having an affair, because he's seen pictures and found out that even though I'm a bastard, I'm at least white. My dad has left the country never to be heard from again because he's avoiding millions of dollars of tax fraud. My mum leaves town because she's become the subject of town gossip. I'm almost 30 now, and have had DNA tests done on myself because I'm struggling to carry a pregnancy to term. Mostly British Scottish, with a little Southeast Asian and Chinese. Not an iota of Maori or the Pacific Island DNA in me. To date, mum is still trying to convince me that my dad's mum must have cheated on her husband and lied to my bio dad about his ancestry. I've seen pictures of my bio dad when I was a kid and he's most definitely Pacific Islander of some kind and built like a brick shithouse, so there's definitely something not right there. Anyway, now I've got a great stepdad, and have honestly never cared enough to find my actual bio dad, even when I thought he just left the country. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.